evening and welcome to Bermuda College's fall lecture featuring Mr. Craig Simmons, who is our senior lecturer in economics in the Division of Liberal Arts. We would like to acknowledge this evening Sir John Swan, Dame Jennifer Smith, and serving members of Parliament. Dr. Duranda Green, Bermuda College's president, and Dr. Mark Vandenhendy, Vice President of Bermuda College in Academics and Student Services. At this time, I'd like to ask if you would please silence your mobile phones. Thank you. Regarding Mr. Simmons, my esteemed colleague, his teaching experience at Bermuda College includes courses in microeconomics, macroeconomics, international economics, and ecological economics. He was a member of the inaugural Sustainable Development Roundtable created by Cabinet in the spring of 2005, the Energy Commission, a regulatory body, in 2012, and SAGE, the Spending and Government Efficiency Commission, set up by the Minister of Finance in April 2013. Mr. Simmons is also a consultant to a number of firms in the financial services, real estate, and public utilities sectors. In 2013, he was a contributing author to Offshore Commercial Law in Bermuda, a compilation of authored titles as edited by Chief Justice Ian Kawley. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Simmons.
Well, thank you for coming. I know why my students are here, but I haven't been able to figure out why the rest of you came along. The title, rather provocative. Maybe that was the hook that brought you here tonight. Let's hope you leave here with something. I always like to start with this slide. It's a disclaimer. And I hope all of you have signed the relevant documents to relieve me of any liability. But yeah, it's the truth. Economists have way too much say in society nowadays, despite the fact that we know very little. I want to start with this. Everything is relative, even when it shouldn't be. I suppose you figured out by now that those two circles are the same size. Yeah? Last night, I had a dream, and you guys were in it. In that dream, I had a dream job. I was making over $300,000 a year. With the job came a company credit card, and I thought I was doing really, really well. Until, now remember, this is my dream. My wife's sister's husband, I discovered around the dinner table, was making $75,000 more than me. Before that discovery, I was living on cloud nine. I mean, $300,000 is a little less than I'm making right here at Bermuda College. I don't know why you guys are laughing. My boss is at the back. But the fact that I found out that my wife's sister's brother was making more than me, suddenly, I felt poor. How can that be? Well, the answer's on the screen. Relativity. Be careful who you compare yourself with. There's also that great rule that you'll find in the Bible. It says not to covet or desire your neighbor's house or field or slave or high-tech gadget or donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. That's one of the ways I suppose we could fight relativity. An application of it, I don't know whether you're familiar with Williams-Sonoma. They came out with a bread machine many years ago. Yeah, a bread machine had never entered the market before. And so when Williams-Sonoma put the bread machine on the market, they couldn't sell any. So someone gave them the idea, put a bigger, more expensive bread machine on the market. And what do you know? The bread machines they wanted to sell in the first place were flying off the shelf. Relativity again. And here's another application of relativity. The weekend is coming, and you want to pick up someone in a bar. The advice I can give you is to find someone who looks like you, pretty close, but a U minus. Okay. So someone fairly close, but not as attractive as you. When you get out into the club, the other folks are going to look at you, and they're going to be able to compare you against someone else. If you don't have, you just go to the club with a bunch of different people, the opposite is not going to be able to figure out whether or not you are desirable. But if you go in with a U minus, it's very easy for the folks you're chasing to put you in perspective, and they'll look at you and say, he's pretty good looking, or she's pretty good looking. It's just like the bread machine. You need a comparison. You need to be able to relate to something. And so, again, try it on Saturday night. Let me know how it works out. Now, if someone is asking you to go out to a bar, to a party, you should question whether or not they've chosen you because you are a U minus. Okay. Relativity. The reason why I bring this up is because we're talking about how the economic pie is divvied up. I have a funny feeling that a lot of you came here tonight feeling pretty good about yourselves, feeling pretty good about your incomes. And here I am, I'm going to compare you with someone else. Don't say I didn't warn you. Relativity. It's all over the place, even when it shouldn't be, okay? So, this is the end result of my talk, how the economic pie possibly is divvied up. Notice there's a question mark, because the truth is, I have no data for Bermuda. Bermuda does not collect data on income, and by income I'm talking about salaries, wages, rents, profits, royalties. We don't collect that type of stuff, so it's impossible for me to do any research. We're going to talk in a minute about where this information came from, but that's a pretty stark statement there, that the upper class, the top 10%, are earning half of our national income, and that the bottom 50% are taking home 20%, and of course the middle 30%. I thought I'd do a little bit of background so that you know where this stuff came from. The rock star in economics right now is a man by the name of Thomas Piketty, a Frenchman at the Paris School of Economics, and he started to amass data on wealth and income in 2001. This 2003 paper in the Journal of Political Economy was his first in English, but it essentially is based on this 2001 paper, looking at income inequality in France. And you can see the dates. It's over quite an extensive period of time. And that's an important point. This lecture is about the long run. We're not looking at where Bermuda could go over the next year or two. It's not something that you can fix in the next year or two. This is something that we could perhaps address over decades, over a 10-year period. So that needs to be very clear. So we're not talking about fiscal policy or the budget or monetary stimulus. These are long-run trends. And then Professor Piketty hooked up with Emmanuel Saez, and he did some work on the United States. Saez is an expert. He then moved on to work with Professor Banerjee and did work on India. and then what I call a comparison between the Anglo-Saxon world, which is the English-speaking world, and continental Europe, France, Germany, and the Nordic economies. That is in book form. The first 3 bullets are available free online. There's papers. You can either go to Professor Piketty's site directly or to the Journal of Political Economy or the Quarterly Journal of Economics. And they're fairly easy to read. The Top Incomes Over the 20th Century, that is a book. You're not going to be able to get that one for free. But they have a common theme, looking at top incomes. By top incomes, we're talking about the top 10% and the top 1% over those periods of time. And so what we've noticed over the sort of 20th century is that there's a natural sort of propensity for economies to have greater and greater inequality. So from about 1900 up until 1914, inequality rose. And then something happened. 1914 came, the First World War. And ordinarily during wars, the ability to make money isn't what it normally is. So those people who had capital as their main source of income didn't do so well. And so during the period 1914 till about 1945, when the Second World War ended, top incomes decreased significantly. And as a result, the world, or at least these countries, became more equal. Following the Second World War, 1945, things started up again. Started up again in the sense that there was a trend toward greater inequality. The trend toward greater inequality really got going in the late 70s and early 80s with the coming of people like Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Ronald Reagan in the United States. That's just an overview of their findings. The book by Golden and Katz, Claudia Golden and Lawrence Katz, The Race Between Education and Technology, is a really great explanation as to inequality, or the causes of inequality. In a nutshell, they're saying that think of supply and demand models. The demand for talent, the demand for labor is driven by firms. It's particularly driven by technology. So as technology has developed, the demand for labor has shifted to the right, if you will. The supply of labor, or the supply of education, is driven by how many people can graduate from university or colleges. In the early post-Second World War period, so we're talking 1945 until the sort of 60s and early 70s, the graduation rates in universities were rather high, which we could show as a right shift in the supply of talent, the supply of labor. And because the supply was growing faster than the demand, we saw, well, wages falling, at least for talented individuals. What we've seen since the late 70s and early 80s is a slowing down in graduation rates. And as a result of that slowdown in graduation rates, the supply has slowed. Demand has continued to shift to the right, and what we've noticed is that the wages going to the talented has increased, and with it, so has inequality. Golden and Katz provide a slightly different reason for the rise in inequality. They're using a supply and demand model. You know, that's sort of typical for an economics person, and it's rather simple for the average person to understand. It's a great book, but I suppose maybe that summary I gave you is enough. Greg Mankiw. My students hopefully will recognize that name, Greg Mankiw. He is the author of our textbook at Bermuda College. Arguably, he produces the most popular economics textbook ever. So if you've done economics in the past, you might have used Paul Samuelson's book. Greg Mankiw's book has supplanted that as being the most popular. It's been translated into about a dozen languages. He's just a very clear writer. At least I think so. I doubt that my students agree with that. He was one of George Bush's economic advisors, and I think he was also an advisor to Mitt Romney in the last presidential election. So you could see his point of view. He is defending the 1%. His argument, in a nutshell, is rather libertarian. Libertarians believe, you know what, if I am talented enough to earn $300,000 a year, no one, including the state, the government, has the right to take that away. He calls that just desserts. And what we should be focusing on, what the government should be focusing on, is equality of opportunity. So Mankiw is arguing, as a libertarian would, for better access to education, because arguably that is the best way to improve inequality. Taking from Peter and giving to Paul is not the best way to go about this. So Mankiw's paper is readable. It is available free online. You go to his site, Google Greg Mankiw, go to his Harvard site, and you can download it. I would recommend it, especially if you're going to read the papers by Piketty and his colleagues, who tend to be coming from the left. And he gives some very good arguments as to why just desserts is a viable theory, a good alternative to the more liberal views of Piketty. And the final bullet here, Thomas Piketty's Tomb, Capital in the 21st Century. It was released earlier this year in English. It came out in French in 2013. It has become a bestseller. A colleague mentioned to me, at least with the online versions of the book, people get as far as, I mean, it's about a 600-page book. And apparently people only get as far as page 26. It must be very much like the book written by, what's it called, A Brief History in Time, the physicist, oh boy. Hawking, Stephen Hawking. Yeah, it's another book that was a bestseller, but I think people got as far as page 6 and said, this is just too hard. Piketty's book, I mean, I think it's a great read. I spent my summer reading it, but I think I'm in a minority. It's not the first time. My mother always told me that I was special. So if you can, I would suggest you plow through at least the introduction, which I think is of about 46 pages. So that's where I'm coming from. That's the literature. And, well, let's get on with it. As with anything, we need to put things into context. And, well, this definition of capital is rather controversial, because for the most part, in economics, capital is restricted to things just like machines and buildings. It doesn't include land. Land is seen as being another factor of production. But Piketty decided that, or at least this created a definition where capital is any asset that can be traded. So as you can see, machines, buildings, land, infrastructure, natural resources all constitute capital. It's a definition. You know, he's like an accountant. You know, we don't argue about how do accountants set up their balance sheets. Something about assets equals net worth and liabilities or something like that. I can never remember. But it's a system that he's put into place. And so he's saying that all wealth is capital, regardless of the form that it takes. And we're talking about national income here as opposed to gross domestic product. You should spend some time talking about the difference. Gross domestic product, the value of all final goods and services produced in a given period of time, normally a year. Gross domestic product looks at economic activity in a geographical location. So for example, in the most recent numbers we have are for 2013. The gross domestic product for Bermuda in 2013 was about $5.6 billion. So that's the value of all goods and services, or alternatively, the value of all incomes earned in Bermuda by Bermuda residents. I'm not using that concept, that idea here. National income, on the other hand, is going to be the value of all incomes earned by Bermudians worldwide. Okay? So it's the main difference between GDP and GNP is the fact that GNP, gross national product, or national income, is looking at Bermudians. GDP is looking at Bermuda. Okay? So that's the first thing. And so in Piketty's analysis, he can divide national income into two components: income from labor and income from capital. And I'm going to be using, I like to use symbols. Okay? My students are saying, yeah. Symbols are beautiful. There's something elegant about a symbol. The aesthetic. So are you going to use the symbol Y for income? And I think I mentioned this already, that I'm going to use K for capital. Or you might say, well, why isn't capital C? Well, it's the Germanic influence. The Germans, in German, capital starts with a K. So we've continued that. Oh, and I forgot to mention this. Because we're looking at national income, when we talk about capital, we're talking about domestic as well as foreign capital. The Bermudians earn real estate around the world. They earn shares in companies around the world. And so capital, the income from capital, has to include both foreign and domestic. So, isn't that gorgeous? Just look at that. If you've read Piketty's book, beta should resonate in your mind. It should be sort of buzzing about right now. Do you hear it? Okay, never mind. Beta is what's known as the capital income ratio. And as it suggests, it's the ratio of the capital that people of a country earn to the national income that's generated in an economy. And that's key to the analysis that he uses. In fact, in the first three bullets of the literature, a lot of time is spent analyzing beta, because beta is, the capital is widely held by the rich, by the top 10%. And he sort of observes how beta changes through time. Beta is a proxy for inequality, capital income ratio. Yeah, here we come home. This is Bermuda. These are from the most recent GDP figures. It's called the GDP release put out by the Department of Statistics. You see, of course, the top national accounts. And I'm interested in the far right column, 2013. And you can see the heading across the top there, gross domestic product, right there. And I think I can't see it from here. Well, yes, I can. No, my eyes are terrible. It's about $5.6 billion. Okay? That's gross domestic product. That's the number that you would have heard in the press if you were reading. And it was, well, up in nominal terms, but down in real terms, which is really what we should be looking at. But I'm not so interested in gross domestic product tonight. I'm interested in this thing called national income. Oh, where is it? There it is. Gross national income. And if you go across to the end, I think it's around $7 billion. Now, how can I account for the difference? Well, let's work our way down. The first line underneath gross domestic product, this is compensation of employees, the difference between what Bermudians are earning overseas and what non-Bermudians are earning in Bermuda. And if you look at the net, it's frightening. Yeah? It's about $1 billion, eh? Let me put my glasses on. Yeah, it's just over $1 billion. So that means that Bermudians are earning, on net, more than $1 billion more than non-Bermudians are earning on island. So Bermudian working in London, Hong Kong, wherever, they are earning quite a bit more. So if you're worried about non-Bermudians sending all of their money home to the Philippines or to the States or to Canada, I don't think we have very much to worry about, because when you look at it in relative terms, that number, The 1.2, compare it with the one underneath it, like night and day. In that sense, Bermudians are doing quite well. Okay? So that's one reason why national income is a lot bigger than gross domestic product. And then the next one, with respect to property, I mentioned that Bermudians own properties around the world. So a Bermudian with a property in, say, Manhattan, collecting rent off that property, well, that's income to a Bermudian. And I suppose, what would be the opposite of that? Going to the rest of the world, a Bermudian renting property from an American, well, that would be a loss. On net, I think it's a positive, isn't it? Positive. Let's take a look. Almost $1 billion, 970-something million. So again, Bermudians on net are property earners. Bermudians are earning almost $1 billion from net in rental income. We're a pretty amazing group of people. And yeah, that's pretty much it. To underscore these numbers, when you go to the balance of payments is also produced by the Statistics Department, and there's a rather interesting entry in the balance of payments. There's the income we earn from international business, there's the income we earn from tourism, and then there's a thing called investment income. Just before the recession, we were earning more than twice what was being earned in tourism. So we were earning almost $1 billion in investment income. This is Bermudians earning $1 billion from their rents and from their assets overseas. In fact, this is the second leg of our economy. Tourism is the third leg. International business, unmistakably, is the primary leg, but the secondary leg in our economy is investment income. Now, of course, during the recession, investment income took a wallop, but it's back. At present, it's around $800 million, heading toward $1 billion, and it won't be long before it's heading towards 1.5. That's because Bermudians take, let's say, $1 of their income, and they save it. Some stays in Bermuda, and some goes overseas. And we've been moving enough money overseas to the point where it's generating an income flow of close to $1 billion a year. We're truly an extraordinary group of people when you think about that, and especially when you look at these national income figures. And I should also add that no government told Bermudians that, you know what, you guys should move some money overseas. No committee was convened. It's what you want to call the invisible hand. You guys just decided on your own that, let me take a portion of my income, keep some in Bermuda, move some overseas. There's a definite lesson in there that you're a pretty smart group of people. Well done. I need to back up a second. The ratios here. Labor income makes up about 2/3 of national income. So if you're thinking in terms of $7 billion, well, you can do 2/3 of that. And capital income would be 1/3. I've already said that capital income is made up of dividends, rents, profits, royalties. Half of capital income is in the form of real estate, and the other half is in terms of dividends, or in terms of financial assets, stocks and bonds. Okay. What Piketty calls the first fundamental law of capitalism. It's not really a law. It's a tautology. I mean, it's like saying assets is equal to whatever they say assets are equal to, liabilities and net worth. There's nothing great about this. It's an accounting system. But he calls it his first fundamental law. The really good one is the second one. And that's why my students are here tonight, to find out what the second law is all about. You want me to hurry up, get to the second law, right? No, not yet. Take your time. I'm going to dangle it in front of you. Anyway, the first fundamental law. alpha equals R times beta. R is the rate of return on all of those different forms of capital: land, machines, infrastructure, buildings, you name it. So, very simply, if the share of capital is 30% and beta, the capital income ratio, is 6, it follows that the rate of return on capital, and again, that's a very general definition of capital, is 5%. That's a pretty broad statement. And again, we're dealing with averages here. I suppose I could go on about averages. Averages are dangerous. Consider this. Do you think that you could stand an average temperature of 70 degrees? My students are all saying, don't say yes, don't say yes. Because if you could, or if you did, if you were foolish enough to say, yeah, average temperature of 70 degrees, I could handle that. Well, I'd say, over a 24-hour period, we'll give you the first 12 hours at 0 degrees, and then the second 12 hours at 140 degrees. Yeah? And that would give you the average of 70 degrees. I don't think anybody in this room would survive that. Yeah? So beware of averages. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, because most of the data that I'm going to be using is based on averages. Yeah? So again, take everything I'm saying with several grains of salt. So a numeric example may help. So this is Bermuda. We've already established that national income, Y is national income, is $7 billion. And I know people are going to tell me that Bermuda does not have a population of 70,000. There's a reason why I picked 70,000. Because it's a nice number. Okay? So when you go home, you can do run the real numbers. So, if you bear with me, we know that national income is $7 billion, population of 70,000. That means that on a per capita basis, the average Bermudian, average, bad word, is earning $100,000. There are some that are earning maybe $1, but there's some that are earning a lot more than that. And if you accept that alpha, the share of capital, is 30%, that would mean that on average, a Bermudian has labor income, L income, of 70,000 and is earning capital income of 30,000. That would suggest that maybe you got a job, working downtown, plus you have a couple of apartments. The K income might be your rental income and maybe some dividends that you're getting. And remember, this is worldwide income. So, if your wealth, which is capital, is equal to 6 years of national income, this is where it gets a little dicey. So what I'm saying is that beta, the capital income ratio, is 6. So the amount of capital that Bermudians as a group possess is around $42 billion worldwide. Yeah. Somebody should say, where the heck are you getting these numbers from, Simmons? Hey, I'm just making this stuff up. But in actual fact, to defend myself, the capital income ratio for many, many countries, Britain, the UK, Germany, France, for most of the countries in the sample, the capital income ratio is in fact 6. What that means is that the amount of capital that most countries possess in 2014 is about 6 times the national income of that country. So I've simply taken that number and applied it to Bermuda. And on that basis, Bermudians worldwide own about $42 billion worth of assets. And per capita, on a per capita basis, the average Bermudian owns about $600,000 worth of wealth. This is an average. The truth is that the working class, lower class Bermudians, lower class Americans, lower class Brits, French, Germans, control about 5% of their country's wealth. Yeah? And most of that wealth is in the form of a pension and annuity, not in the form of dividends and real estate and all that kind of stuff. But, we're just talking averages, just like me being able to tolerate 70 degrees over a 24-hour period. And so on that basis, plugging it back into that first law, fundamental law of capitalism, that would suggest that the average, the return on capital is the ratio of the capital income. That's the $30,000 in red as a proportion of the capital that the average person earns, which is $600,000. And if you do the math, you end up with 5%. It's, you know, it's just an accounting thing. There's no magic to it. It's tautological. And this is true for every society in every time. Again, if it's tautological, there's no magic to it. Okay? So that's the first fundamental law of capitalism. It is present always. More interestingly is this thing, the second fundamental law of capitalism. Asymptotic. I love that word. This is an asymptotic law. Asymptotes. Where's the mathematicians? An asymptote is something tends towards something. It never actually gets there. Another word to describe it is a steady state. So over the long run, remember, the analysis here tonight is about the economy over the long run, over a period of 10 or more years. So over a period of 10 years, the second law of capitalism holds. Remembering that beta is the capital income ratio, and we're saying that that's equal to S over G. Now, Piketty did not invent this. In fact, this goes back, and I didn't mention this in the literature review, but this goes back to the early 20th century. Economists Harrod and Domar developed this law, and it was further developed by a man by the name of Robert Solow, who won a Nobel Prize for the last 20 years. And Piketty has taken it and applied it to his data. And that's the big thing, is that Piketty, after having developed this massive data set, which is available online, so if you, I understand that you guys have access to the internet here for free. If you've got your machines, apparently they've made it so that everybody can access their Googles. You type in Thomas Piketty, go to the Paris School of Economics, and you can download the data set for all of the countries. And this is what's special about him. Most economists, when they do research, they don't make their research available to the public. They simply say, this is what I found. Yeah? Show it to you, but not show you how they got it. What's great about Professor Piketty's work is that he leaves it there for everyone to see. The only person that's done that in the past would have been Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart in their book, This Time is Different. Yeah? So we're in a new age now of transparency where economists are now being obliged to be transparent. So, getting back to the point here. This is a long-run phenomena, that the capital-labor ratio is equal to S over G. Now, there's an assumption here, and this is important. S, the savings rate, is assumed to be fixed. So, for example, if the savings rate were, and I made some notes, I think 10%, and if the growth rate were, 3%, beta would be 300%. So keep that in mind. Savings rate 10%, the economy growing at 3% over a 10 to 15 to 20-year period, beta would be equal to 300, or 3. Okay? That would mean that there's 3 years' worth of capital in an economy. When G slows, when the growth rate, say, slows from 3% to 1.5%, and S remains the same, beta increases. It doubles, in fact. It goes to 6. Now you might say, well, okay, so what? Who cares? Well, what we observe happening is that growth is, in fact, slowing. Has been slowing since the 1980s. In fact, if you look at the post-war growth record, Memory. It's gone. The growth of most industrialized countries between 1950 and 1970 is considerably bigger than the growth record since. This second fundamental law of capitalism predicts that beta would increase, that the capital output ratio would increase, and with it, so too would inequality. Well, when you go and look at the data, that's exactly what you see. That from about 1950 to 1970, the capital labor ratio was declining, which would suggest that inequality was declining. That's what the data show. And that since about 1980, growth has fallen, capital income ratio has increased, and with it, inequality. So, the second fundamental law of capitalism predicts that inequality will increase. Does that answer the question that I put on Moodle? Yeah. Yeah? Okay. That's the first one, right? Both of them. I haven't talked about Bermuda yet. You can't assume that this applies to Bermuda. So don't go anywhere. How am I doing? Good boy. Let's hurry up. So, the data that Professor Piketty and his colleagues gathered gives us these shares of different groups in total income. Total income, national income, synonyms. So looking at these shares and doing it for the UK, the US, Germany, the Nordic countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, South Africa, Colombia, again, memory, too much wine. When you look at the income data for these countries, they fall into three basic categories, and here they are. Countries that typify low inequality, medium inequality, and high inequality. So I want to do a little experiment with the data. Imagine Craiglin, okay? And Craiglin has a national income of $100, okay? And there are 100 people in Craiglin. If income was equally distributed in Craiglin, everybody would have $1. That would be perfect equality. Let's see what a low inequality country, or what a low inequality Craiglin would look like. Okay. So we've got $100, yeah? And it's being spread between 100 people. That would mean that the top 1%, but wait a minute, 100 people, how many would the top 1% be? So that would mean that the one person is earning $7. Yeah? How about the upper class? The upper class make up the top 10%. So that would mean that the average upper class person would be earning the group would be earning $25, and there would be 10 people. So that would be $2.50. Yeah? So the average upper class person in Craiglin in a low inequality situation would be earning $2.50. The middle make up 40%. Okay. So that means that the middle class as a group is earning $45. And there are, how many of them? 30. Because 30% makes up the middle class. Did I get that right? 40? Even better. So, what's 40 over 45? That's $1 and some change. So that would mean that the average middle class person in Craiglin is making $1 and some change. How about the average lower class persons? How many people in the lower class? 50, eh? The lower class makes up 50% of the population. So it's going to be 50 people sharing $30. That one I can do. That's 60 cents. Yeah? So the average lower class person is making 60 cents. The average middle class person is making $1 and a couple of pennies. The average upper class person is making $2.50. And the average, that's funny, the average super rich person is making $7. Does that sound highly unequal to you? It does, doesn't it? But guess what? That's the low inequality case. If we go through this exercise and look at the medium and the high inequality, you think, well, let's look at the high inequality case. Again, this is Craiglin. In the future, the national income is $100 and there are still 100 people. So that would mean the top 1% is making $20. Yeah? One person making 20 bucks. The upper class, 10% of the population, would be making, on average, $5. Okay. The average middle class person, how many people in the middle class? 40%. That's 75 cents. The average middle class person in a high inequality Craiglin. How about the lower class? Is that 40 cents? Inequality. Now, I would argue that Bermuda is more like a highly unequal society than the low or the medium. In actual fact, the Nordic countries like Denmark, Norway, and Sweden fit into the low inequality category. Germany and France would fit into the medium, and the Anglo-Saxon economies of the US, the UK, Canada, Australia would fit into the high inequality category. And I figured because those are our cousins, we are an Anglo-Saxon economy, aren't we, or country? Yeah. And we do seem to be willing to tolerate inequality in ways that Nordics or Germans or French do. I'd say Bermuda fits into that final column. So based on that assumption, I'd say that's what Bermuda looks like, where the average working class person is, in Craiglin, is earning, let's try it again, 2 over 5, 40 cents on average. The average middle class person, 60 cents, and so on. Let's actually apply this to Bermuda. So again, these are annual averages. And remember what I said about averages and 70 degrees. So if Bermuda fits into that far right category of a highly unequal economy, that would mean that the average lower class person is taking home about $70,000 a year, which sounds about right. And the average middle class person is taking home about $131,000. Where it gets a little hazy is when you start looking at the top. Yeah. You start to say, whoa, this is when I get pissed off. You know, because the fact that I'm earning $3.5 million a year, you know, I thought I was in distinguished company. Anyway, yeah, you know, that's BS. So yeah, this is when you start to think, holy smokes. Now, in a Bermudian context, if you have a population of 70,000 people, how many people are going to be considered lower class? Half of 70,000. What's that, 35,000 people? And how many at the top? 1% of 70,000 is like, is that 7,000 or 700? 700? 700. So when we're talking about the super rich, we're talking about 700 people. The upper class is going to be 10% of 70,000. That one I know. 7,000. And then you've got the middle. So, you know, that's an application of Professor Piketty's ratios, these ratios here, to the local economy. Yeah? And the question becomes, so I mean, do we like that? Because one thing I failed to say is that inequality, or our tolerance of inequality, is a deeply political thing. There are economists that would tell you, well, you know, it's just the way it is. People like Professor Mankiw are going to say, well, it's just desserts. I'm a talented individual. I deserve to be making $3.5 million a year. I couldn't help it. God made me this way. Yeah? And now you people at the bottom earning $70,000 want to take it from me? Who the heck do you think you are? That's just desserts. So we got to remember that. It is a deeply political thing, and it is people. I mean, obviously in Nordic economies, they decided that they didn't like the idea of the top 1% earning $3.5 million and the bottom earning $70,000. That was a political decision they made. But I should add this. There's a tension between the desire to redistribute income and the ability or the willingness of people to grow the economic pie. We in Bermuda have focused on growing the economic pie, and we've done a damn good job. Yeah. Our economic pie has grown by leaps and bounds. Now you're all going to say, well, over the last couple of years, well, yeah, over the last couple of years. What did you expect? Yeah? Bubble burst. Stuff happens. But over the long run, if you're looking at the progress that has been made in Bermuda since the 60s, it's miraculous what this island has become. And it has become that because we've focused almost exclusively on growing the economic pie, less on how the economic pie has been distributed. And all I'm saying is, just take a look at how the economic pie has been distributed. Maybe we might want to do things differently. If we want 10 years from now, it's going to be 2024, something like that. If we want Bermuda to be different in 2024 and 2030, maybe we want to do things a little different today so that our children and our grandchildren inherit a society that isn't as unequal as the one we see here today. Yeah? But the decision is ours. It's not a fait accompli. In actual fact, one of the things that the second fundamental law of capitalism tells us is that inequality is natural for a capitalist society. Capitalism has nothing in it that seeks to spread the wealth around. Yeah? Capitalism has within it the ability to grow the economic pie tremendously. Yeah? But it doesn't have within it to make the economic pie more equal. I think that's an important point for people to get. And that if you want the economic pie to be more evenly distributed, there are some things that you're going to have to do. But be careful about how you do it, because if you were to be foolish and say, well, you know what, I believe that everybody should have the same slice. Well, boy, I'm telling you, that economic pie is going to shrink real quick. Yeah? And so there is a balance. Yeah? There is definitely a balance. Okay. Ooh, you guys need to go home, innit? NFL football on tonight and all sorts of stuff. This is simply the data on a monthly basis. Yeah? So the average lower class person is taking home $5.5 grand. The upper class person taking home almost 300 grand. You want to see it on a weekly basis. Here it is. Again, what kind of Bermuda do you want to see going forward? And given that there's a natural tendency for us to go that way, yeah? So Nordic countries, the most equal in the world, if they don't continue to fight against the natural forces of capitalism, will fall into that medium inequality category. And countries like Germany and France that are in the medium inequality category will have a natural tendency to go toward the high inequality category. Yeah. And us, well, we're going to go into the very highly unequal category. I could have put those numbers up, but I didn't want to depress you, because it just becomes more and more unequal. So essentially, if we do nothing, the lower class is going to get an even smaller piece of the pie. They're going to get more pie. Let me be clear about that. You will get more pie, but relative to others, you'll have a smaller piece. Now remember relativity. I was a really happy camper in my dream until I discovered that my wife's sister's husband was making more than me. Yeah? So as we go through time, the middle class, interestingly enough, gets smaller if we do nothing. Middle class share gets smaller, the lower class share gets smaller, and the upper and the top 1% gets bigger. I don't think that's the kind of Bermuda most people would want. And I'd hate for us to wake up in 2024 or 2030 and start to say, damn, what happened? Okay. Policies. Well, I did make some notes, you know, and I should be reading them. Let's see. What did I skip? Not very much. Okay, policies. Remember I showed you the Bermuda national income? The $7 billion, the 5.6? Well, back in the 19th century, it wasn't unusual for governments to produce social tables. And the social tables would look like that, yeah? Or they could look like that. So imagine, I'm not saying this, just the final column, it would be one column. So it would be, you know, Bermuda, top 1%, 3.5 million, upper class, 875 million, and so on. Why couldn't our GDP releases have these social tables that used to be a part of national income accounting in the 19th century? Yeah. Of course, in the 19th century, they didn't talk about lower, middle, and upper class. They would have talked about farmers. They would have talked about noblemen. Yeah. But I think this is a better way to go about describing the different social groups in Bermuda, in the world: lower, middle, upper, top 1%. So social tables would be, I think, a valuable addition to the GDP releases, so that people could know exactly, well, what's going on in Bermuda. You know, I realize that talking about income is like asking a woman about her weight or her age. Yeah, it's not something for polite company. But heck, I mean, I wouldn't be asking you, what do you make? It would be what a particular social group is making. So I don't think we're getting in people's pockets. And I don't think that it would create any, well, it might create a little bit of tension in the sense that those at the very top might think, oh boy, our share is getting larger and larger. Maybe we should put into place less regressive taxes, because those are the things that can be put into place to resist the natural tendency of capitalism toward greater inequality. So what I'm suggesting in the second bullet are policies that could be implemented to slow the natural tendency of capitalism toward greater inequality. Yeah? I'm not suggesting a progressive tax structure, although maybe I should. I'm trying to be politically correct and say less regressive, because in all honesty, the tax structure in Bermuda is regressive. Oh, I just caught myself. I'm using a word that I haven't defined. Okay. Regressive. The lower income people are paying a greater portion, a greater percentage of their income in tax than rich people. Yeah? A proportionate tax system would be one in which all groups, all classes pay the same percentage in tax. A progressive system is one in which, as income goes up, the proportion of income that you pay in taxes rises. Yeah? So, for example, in most countries, most Western-style countries, they have progressive income taxes. Now, I'm not saying that the United States has a progressive tax structure, because I'm not sure that it does. Yeah? But at least the income tax structure is progressive. I put up here a negative payroll tax, only because the major source of taxation in Bermuda is payroll taxes, suggesting a negative payroll tax. The way it works right now, if you make $1 in income, what is the payroll tax in Bermuda anyway? 15%? Or what does the employee pay? 5, 6%? Let's say it's 5% for nice numbers. So, Craig Simmons works at Bermuda College. He makes $1. He would pay how much in tax? 5 cents? 5 cents out of every dollar. Okay, 5%. And then there's Mr. Rich, who's making $1 million a year. How much of that would he pay in tax? Well, I'm not 100% sure, because we have these things called thresholds in Bermuda. So I think, and I stand to be corrected on this, the threshold is like $750,000. So that means Mr. Rich, who's making $1 million a year, is going to pay 5% tax on $750,000, and $250,000 is going to be tax-free. How about Mr. Super Rich, who makes $10 million a year? He's going to pay 5% on $750,000 and 920 or whatever, 900,000, oh, no, it's more than that. A heck of a lot. The majority of his income is going to be tax-free. That is not progressive, it's not proportional, it's regressive. I'm suggesting a negative payroll tax schedule with no threshold. Yeah? The top of the tree is infinity dollars. So get rid of the threshold, and the negative part is you could have the first maybe $25,000, the first $30,000 tax-free. Or better still, if you're making that kind of money, you get some money back from the government. No, don't clap. Yeah. That's what a negative tax structure looks like. Perhaps up until the time you're earning $30,000, you would not pay taxes. Yeah? So if you're earning $30,000, you don't pay any. If you're earning $31,000, you do begin to pay taxes. If you're making less than $30,000, you get a little check in the mail. If you earn $0, you get a bigger check in the mail. That's what a negative payroll tax structure looks like. Pretty simple. Although I know what the policymakers are going to tell me. That Bryce Simmons has always got some crazy ideas. And he's right. I do have crazy ideas. That's the great thing about working at Bermuda College. And I want to thank you. The second idea of making the system less regressive, a value-added tax. Arguably, the rich, the wealthy, spend a greater proportion of their consumption on services than goods. So why not tax it? Yeah? When you go to get your nails painted up at the spa, you don't pay tax on that. But my sense is that rich people probably go to the spa more than poor people, at least I hope they do. But that service is not taxable. I'm suggesting broaden the tax base, which is something that the Chamber of Commerce agrees should happen. Broaden the tax base, and that too would help make the tax structure less regressive. I don't think that one is controversial. The next one is. Now, read this carefully. You see those first two words? Or is that one word? Lump sum? Maybe the hyphen makes it one. I was careful to use the word lump sum corporate tax because we have extensive experience with lump sum corporate taxes in Bermuda. That's the kind of tax we apply to exempt companies. Yeah? And those taxes are what economists would call efficient because they don't distort decision making. Unlike in the United States, that bastion of inefficiency, corporate income taxes. That would help explain why the Googles and everyone else is fleeing to tax havens, because of the nature of the taxes that the US, the UK impose on their citizenry. And I'm suggesting we don't want to get into that game. I would argue that our tax structure in Bermuda is superior to the tax structure of the United States, of the United Kingdom, of Germany, of just about every OECD country. I can't think of an OECD country that has a better tax structure than us. I know I sound like a hypocrite, but I'm not. a corporate tax structure in Bermuda that is lump sum orientated based on the system that we already have in place wouldn't cause people to run. It's what we call a sunk cost. And it could be based on the nature of the business or the size of the business. Very much like banks in Bermuda. They pay a lump sum. Maybe it's, what, $200,000, $300,000, sum a month. Whether or not they make $1 million or $1 billion, they just pay that amount. And guess what? You never hear them complain, eh? You know why? Because it's a lump sum. I'm suggesting if you're going to get corporations to pay into the kitty directly, make it a lump sum. And that, too, would be make the tax structure considerably less regressive. Progressive government spending. Oh, boy. To a large degree, we're already doing this. We just need to stay the course. Now, you heard in the introduction that I was on the SAGE Commission. And I'm proud to say that I was on the SAGE Commission. I think the SAGE Commission did great work. Given the context in which we were working, given the job that was put in front of us, we were told, find a way to streamline government, reduce government spending, balance the budget. That is a short-term goal. And I think we did a reasonable job with the time that we had, given that we didn't have much time. So I'm not suggesting undo what the SAGE Commission, what those recommendations were, but the SAGE Commission's recommendations were for what I would call a short to medium term time frame. This is something for the long term, because education is arguably the best way to address the problem of inequality. One of the reasons why the United States is having so much trouble is that education is expensive. If you want an elite education in the United States, it's really for the top 1%. To get to Harvard, it's almost like the Americans have designed a new system of oligarchy. There's a good chance that your children will go to Harvard if you go to Harvard. There are a couple of exceptions, but further education in the United States is failing because of that. The UK, Germany has a far better higher education system. And Bermuda's not too bad either, because the cost of coming to Bermuda College, dirt cheap. So we need to continue the course when it comes to education, not cutting back, because that is going to be the great equalizer. It's the thing that's going to narrow the gap between the top and the bottom. And health, transportation, that bottom one, pensions. Pensions are arguably the only wealth that lower class people have. That's it. They don't own real estate. Most of the real estate is owned by the top 1%, the top 10%, and then the middle class. Lower class people ain't got nothing, just a pension. So we can't afford to mess too much with that. And, oh, this one here, I'm expecting a lot of pushback. Now, you see that word on the end? It says guidelines. It's one thing that I would argue against is the legislation, because legislation puts people in a straitjacket. I'm more of an anarchist. I believe we got to get rid of the government. Anyway, that's what we talk about. Never mind. You don't want to hear about it. That's another crazy Bermuda College idea we talk about in social science, of getting rid of the government. But guidelines, it's very, very important. And it's also very important for us to realize that laws, once they're in place, they're very difficult to get out of place. A good example is the pension scheme we have going. SAGE recommend we move from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. The private sector made that transition years ago. Public sector, we're dragging our feet. If we continue to drag our feet, boy, young people are not going to want to hear this, but there ain't going to be no money around for you when you get to be my age. But that's another story. So guidelines, again, being sensitive to the needs of working class people, rather than saying, you know, let them just figure it out for themselves. And I think, oh, sheesh, Lord have mercy. I'm coming full circle. What is just? Yeah? What do we consider in Bermuda to be a just society? Utilitarians, their thing is the greatest good for the greatest number. That's, I don't know if I like that. Well, I suppose I do to a certain degree. Utilitarianism is based on sort of taking from Peter to give to Paul. The idea that a rich person is not going to feel the loss of $100 very much. But if you give that $100 to a poor person, they're going to benefit a lot. So the idea of taking from Peter to give to Paul could in fact make the society better off. That's what redistribution policy is about by and large. Liberalism, I don't want to talk about that anymore. I talked briefly about libertarianism, how my money is mine and the state has no right to take it away from me. That's just desserts. This final bullet. Are we heading in the direction of a new oligarchy? I thought we were trying to get rid of the old one. Yeah? But I'm really concerned that based on those social tables I had up there, that we're heading in the direction in which there will be a new oligarchy, because the people at the top are going to have a disproportionate amount of political power. Yeah? They will only have one vote when they go to the election, but they will be able to make sizable donations to political campaigns. They will have access to the minister's ear. They will be able to put into place policies that will further their agenda, possibly at the expense of the bottom 50%. That scares the heck out of me. Yeah? So, the rise of a new oligarchy. If there's a single reason why we need to begin to veer our economy away from greater inequality, it is that one. Because the old oligarchy, they were a nasty group of people. Yeah? I mean, I know we like to, you know, say, oh yeah, they were benevolent, paternalistic. Christmas time, they'll give you a turkey and all that kind of stuff. You know, like kiss my, you know. So oligarchy scared the heck out of me. I mean, the Russian oligarchs, I mean, those are not a pleasant group of people. Yeah? And these new ones, who knows what they're going to look like. I don't mean physically, but what kind of policies they're going to want to put into place. Thank you for your patience. And I think we're going to go to Q&A. Okay, this is good news. Oh, question? I was hoping there weren't any.
Good evening. You stated that you had some radical ideas. Can you share some of those ideas
I did?
with us? Yeah. Yes, you did.
I did?
Yeah. One or two.
Yeah, come to class on Wednesday. Well, the idea of a more, the politically correct thing was to say less regressivity. The flip side of that is greater progressivity on the tax side and even greater progressivity on government spending. And I would argue that we're already seeing, well, bearing the fruits of government spending in the public system. I don't know about my colleagues, but I've noticed major changes in the quality of students coming out of the public system. And when I say major, I mean major. there are young people coming out of the public system with horsepower like I've not seen in students coming out of the private system. Some of them are actually here tonight. Serious horsepower. I think this move toward the Cambridge system, having external exams and getting our middle school students to do these Cambridge certificates has given our education system a new lease on life. It's truly amazing to see the intellectual ability, their ability to sort of do mathematics, their writing ability. It's almost like a dream come true. The truth is, I teach these guys for free because they come with a thirst for knowledge. You're not having to sort of beat them over the head. Like I say, they got some serious horsepower. I just hope they got a decent steering wheel, because you know what happens when you got a lot of horsepower in the steering wheel, you're going to hit something. So in many ways, it's sort of my goal, I suppose, to sort of guide them. But I'm really impressed with what I've seen coming out of the education system. I can only imagine what it's going to look like in 5 to 10 years if we maintain this course, and if we sort of double up on our efforts. That's a part of what I would call progressive government spending. Yeah, we're already doing it, but rather than SAGE recommendations, cut back on spending. Maybe we have to cut back on spending for the next couple of years, but we can't continue like that, because we're talking about a number of things. Getting the economic engine going. These kids are going to be able to do things that my generation could only dream of. They've got that kind of horsepower, that kind of imagination. And that's going to do great things for not only the size of the economic pie, but how that pie is divvied up. So that's a biggie for me, maintaining a sizable portion of the budget to education.
Yes, can you hear me? I'm sorry, Mr. Simmons.
Yes, sir.
In terms of the last 7 years of, we call the economic downturn, and the fact that even people who are educated aren't able to survive or come back and enjoy the benefits of their education. I wonder, when you speak of the new oligarchy, what part does the banking system play in this whole scenario? Because if you notice, nobody in the banking system got charged for anything. And our intentions may be pure, our motives may be pure, but you find that people who've done the right thing end up with nothing. This is where I think the oligarchy thing really frightens all of us. And I would like to know from you, if you can, sir.
I can.
Yes. Can you tell us what part the banking system plays in all of our aspirations?
Banks have an important role to play. I mean, banks have been given a unique privilege in our society. They create money out of thin air. I mean, bankers don't like for you to know that, but there's two types of money out there. There's the BMA notes that are backed by US dollars, and there are about 120 million of them. And then there's bank money, of which there is about $3.4 billion, maybe more. Yeah. If I were to try to create money, they'd put me up at Westgate. So bankers have been given a great privilege, and I think with that comes a responsibility. Bankers had basically free rein to create credit. In fact, banks in the lead up to the recession, or especially after 2005, loaned out all of the deposits that you and I had put in the bank. I think it might have been something like $3.8 billion. And once they had loaned all that out, they kept going. I think at its peak, they had loaned out about $4.5 billion, when the deposit base was only $3.8 billion. And if they could have gone to 10, I suppose they would have kept going. And that fueled a property boom. And so you get these bubbles going. And so the question that I have is, how can we prevent that happening again? Because it will, if we don't put into place policies to prevent it. Now, I have to give the BMA some credit because they are putting together guidelines, and I'm hoping that one of those guidelines is that the ratio of loans to deposits will be kept less than 100%. So in other words, we will never ever have a situation where the loans that banks give out exceed the deposit base. Up until 2005, that was implied. It was sort of the unwritten rule. Something happened in 2005 where everybody lost their mind. The government lost their mind, and the banks and private citizenry, Bermudians, lost their mind. But throughout the 90s and the 80s, there was just this guideline where banks would lend out up to about 80 or 85% of their deposits. And that way you can, to a large degree, prevent bubbles. Now, there's also the question of, do we really need banks? Can we not create what some people call shadow banks, where you have peer-to-peer lending, especially with sort of the kind of technology we've got out there, where individuals can be matched up and you can get around the problem that banks have. You see, banks accept deposits. Now, those deposits are short-term. I put $100 in today, I take it out tomorrow. But banks lend long. You've got 20-year mortgages. So how is a bank supposed to match a 20-year mortgage with deposits that are coming and going? Well, one solution is what some people call shadow banking, where someone who's got, say, hundreds of thousands of dollars matches up with someone who needs $100,000, and they agree that we're going to make this loan for a 5, 10, 15, 20-year period at a certain interest rate. Yeah. Why couldn't we begin to move in that direction? I'm not suggesting that we abolish banks, but that at least banks have competition, and that there be alternative means by which you match savers with lenders. I think that would also help stabilize the banking system and prevent the unfortunate occurrence of 2005 to 2008. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes. Which country? Partially.
Okay.
Can you tell me if anybody's ever done that?
So which country has
Anybody has ever done that?
created a shadow banking system?
Created a banking system with individuals.
Yes, the whole shadow banking sector is based on sort of peer-to-peer lending. And in fact, the Volcker rule is really about ring-fencing banks so that banks can't engage in the careless lending that they engaged in prior to the recession, saying to retail banks, look, you can only lend out your deposit base. That's what the Volcker rule is all about. So I think people are giving that a serious look because banks can have the potential to destabilize the real economy.
I agree with you.
What country has done it?
What country what people in what country individual to individual that keep an economy going?
Oh, well, that's a different question. Well, I'm suggesting that we begin moving in that direction. And in the US and the UK, throughout Europe, you have a sizable shadow banking industry. Those shadow banks at least have given us, I would say, a template as to what non-banking lending could look like. And I think we need to explore it in the interest of stability, because I don't think we can trust it to one entity.
Okay. Is this on? Okay. Mr. Simmons, you was talking about in the supply and demand formula, what is the demand in? And because it's like someone was just saying, it seems like more people are getting educated. However, it's not conducive to what's really happening in the world. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. That's what it looks like.
Okay. You're talking about that, the reference I made to the race between education and technology?
Right.
That supply and demand model?
Supply and demand.
Okay. Well, we've got to make a distinction between the short run and the long run. In the long run, the demand side is being driven by technology. I don't think there's any doubt that the rate of technological development is increasing the demand for talent. Yeah. Where we're having a bit of a problem, especially in Bermuda, is our ability to produce talented people. Now, you're right that since the recession, quite a few people have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in education and have been unable to find a job. I don't want to suggest that there are no risks associated with getting an education. You know, prior to the recession, we got the impression that it was risk-free. I'm hoping that since the recession, we now understand that there are risks associated with just about everything. There are no guarantees. Yeah? So if you're going to spend money on an education, think very carefully about the qualification you're going to get. I like to advise my students to get a basic education. Ideally, I would say get a liberal arts education, only because I teach in the liberal arts faculty. But once you've got that liberal arts education, begin to pursue professional qualifications, whether it be in the insurance area, the accounting area, whatever area you're going to go into, make sure you get professional qualifications. Because academic qualifications, I mean, look at me, a great failure. Yeah. So I wouldn't recommend, you know, doing that college thing, getting a degree in economics, come back to Bermuda College, teach. No. Get a basic degree, get some professional qualifications, and make some real money. That, I think, is the way to go. That way you manage the risk. If you're going to do a degree, I hope Professor Ferris isn't here tonight, in psychology, Professor Rothwell? No, he's teaching tonight. Or sociology. You have to know that there aren't going to be a lot of jobs in Bermuda for someone with a degree in sociology or psychology. So why would you spend $100,000 pursuing a degree in that area? Maybe you should have done something in culinary arts or studied the trades, gotten training as opposed to an education. So I think we lost our way to a certain degree. I mean, I applaud people who want to study for the sake of studying. That's what I do. I sit up and, read books. With what purpose? It just turns me on. Yeah? I don't make any money off of it. Yeah. But if you're going to go to a bank and take out a loan, you need to be really careful about what it is you're studying, because there's no guarantee that you're going to get a job when you get back here. And the other advice I would give to young people, when you graduate, don't come back to this place. Get your British passport, get an American, a Canadian, get like Jason Bourne. You familiar with Jason Bourne? Open up your briefcase and look at this and where am I going today? And spend a good decade working and living overseas so that when you come back here, you've got something to offer. But if you come back with an academic qualification, you're like me, useless.
When you're talking about the inequality, our tolerance for inequality politically.
Yes.
How did Norway do politically how they want?
Well, the Nordic countries put into place highly progressive income taxes. If you go to the Nordic countries, you'll pay out about half of your income in tax. Yeah? In Bermuda, we're paying about a fifth of our income in tax. You see, that's an order of magnitude. Now, could we tolerate giving half of our income to the government? I would argue, no, we're not. We are a low-tax jurisdiction. That's the way we advertise ourselves to the world. I know we can't use the word tax haven, but low-tax jurisdiction. Yeah. So as a low-tax jurisdiction, we're severely limited in how much we can spend on education, how much we can devote to pensions, how much we can devote to health and transportation. Yeah. You can only get so much out of 20% of gross domestic product.
What is the quality of life then?
Ah. Well, I think you need to ask someone in Norway. Arguably, the Danes and the Norwegians are some of the happiest people on the planet. But would we be happy with that situation? I think we need a attitude adjustment, yeah, before we could think about going that way. I don't think any political party would ever get elected on a campaign of, I'm going to raise your taxes.
Evening, Mr. Simmons.
Good evening.
I was just wondering, do you think...
Sorry. Hi. Trey?
Do you think the inequality in our sister countries like UK or US would affect our economy as a country?
Yeah, because we export major services to the United States, to the United Kingdom, and so we have to mimic them. Yeah. That answers your question, sort of? Yeah? Okay.
For the low-income people, you talked about pensions.
Yes.
If people nowadays are not working, or their jobs that they are working at, they're making less money, so what is going to happen to them in the future with very little or no pensions?
Oh, this is not a pretty place we're in. But this comes back to, real world stuff. There are risks inherent in whatever we do. Yeah? And I've got to come back to your point. But I want to jump off and talk about entrepreneurs, the lifeblood of our society. Entrepreneurs take tremendous risks. Most entrepreneurs fail. Yeah? I mean, so if your kid says, I want to be an entrepreneur, slap them upside the head, because they're destined to failure. But at the same time, we need to celebrate entrepreneurs because they take the risks. With respect to pensions, it's like crap happens, Let's hope it doesn't happen again. But what we're in right now is a once-in-a-lifetime scenario. In many ways, what we did before the recession created the conditions for the recession. That's why I'm adamant that the banking system be repaired so that you don't get the proliferation of credit that you got before. You don't want to get bubbles going. I mean, we see the potential for bubbles in the city, in London. We see the potential for bubbles in Beijing, throughout the major cities in China. And it's got a lot to do with the proliferation of credit. We've got to reform the banking system. But, risks are just part and parcel of life. I feel for those people who are drawing on their pensions because, when it comes time to really claim on them, what are they going to have? And those people who even have pensions, it looks like you're not going to get cost of living allowance. So when you retire at 65 and you're getting your $1,000 pension a month, and if you happen to live 30 years after that, you're not going to get an inflation allowance. So if there's a lot of inflation in that period, that's a lot of dog food that senior citizens are going to have to eat. Yeah? Again, risks. You can't insulate people from risk. It is a part and parcel of life. And what I like about the defined contribution scheme is that it forces individual to assume some of the risk. I don't think it's fair that the taxpayer should assume the risk of my pension payout. I just don't think it's fair. I mean, I should think it's fair because I'm going to benefit from it, but I don't because I'm weird.
Hi. I just want to find out what your opinion is on...
First of all, let me say I'm honored to be here this evening at your lecture. I found it very interesting, but I find it somewhat perplexed.
Yes,
First of all, you mentioned about entrepreneurship. And
so, Joel, your mic is not working.
I hope that everybody understands that entrepreneurship is very simple. It's adding value to value. So whether you're a teacher or a clock, a repair person or what, is taking something and adding value to that something. And all of us can be entrepreneurs. It's a question of what you decide you want to add value to what you already have. And that's what the chap that developed Apple, well, he took a telephone and said, look, I want to make this better and better and better, and became the largest capital company in the world because he did an entrepreneurship. Martin Luther King was a ministerial entrepreneur because he took an idea and developed it and improved on it to a point that it changed the whole nation. So everybody has a chance to be an entrepreneur. My second point, which I think is very relevant, is the lecture this evening was superb. There's only one thing that was missing. If you go to northern countries, they are very xenophobic. They produce things that they have been producing for years and very consistently do it. We used to do that when we had an agricultural-based society and a tourist society. We did more of it. As we became an international business that keeps now our economy going, the imbalances that you see are partly created by the so-called capitalists, the so-called entrepreneurs running these companies that get a much larger income. But they're not companies, they're not Bermuda companies. They're companies in Bermuda, but doing business elsewhere. But they get caught into the mix of our economic nomenclature, which tends to give us a sense that we should be somehow or the other in the norm, somewhat much higher up in our income. If you strip those companies out of Bermuda, we would practically have nothing. So, and I think that if we continue to mislead the public, what we end up doing is we get people feeling that I am of less value because I can't achieve what somebody in industry is achieving without the preparation. And as the good professor says, that if you go off and you study and you qualify and you get the job, and there are Bermudans earning those types of money. So I don't think Bermuda is a typical example of an economic formulae that you would use in many other societies. And I think that what we've done is we have got Bermudians feeling very negative about Bermuda because they can't buy into something that they don't understand. And we keep reinforcing that misunderstanding.
I agree with you. Prior to the recession, we believed that Bermuda had a first world infrastructure, first world regulatory environment, all of these great things. That hasn't gone anywhere, you know. Some people have left, some human capital has left, but the essence of what was there before is still here. This is arguably one of the best places to make money. It's one of the best places to work. You know, I get to come to work by ferry, and I'm going to tell you, coming into Hamilton Harbor, I came in day before yesterday, I was like, man, this is one beautiful place. Yeah, it's like, how did we do this? We did it. We have a first world infrastructure, and we can do great things here. Yeah. In many ways, we got to let people do it. I was talking to a small business person today, and she was bemoaning the fact that she's finding it difficult to make it as a small business. The big guys can throw their weight around, they can achieve economies of scale. And she was sort of asking me, so what are the kinds of government policies that we can put into place to help small business get ahead? It's an excellent question, and we do need to do more to aid and abet the development of small businesses, of entrepreneurs, because they are our greatest treasure. So I agree with you, Sir John, wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Yes,
sir.
Hello, just a quick question. I just wanted to hear your views on our debt situation. Like, what you think is the future with that, or how would you handle it?
Well, we have it. Ain't nothing we can do about it. Well, there is actually. Oh, thank you. I'd like to see us transfer that debt from almost entirely in US dollars toward Bermuda dollars. Yeah. That's a big difference. We've got to pay back the debt with US dollars. Imagine we could take a fair chunk of that debt and finagle it into Bermuda dollars.
How?
Yeah? By issuing, when the U.S. debt becomes due, you reissue bonds, but Bermuda dollar bonds. So you're essentially changing the composition of the debt. And that will, I suppose, ease the strain to earn the U.S. dollars that are necessary. The other good thing is, once you get that debt, or a fair portion of it, in Bermuda dollars, you can then begin to inflate that debt away. Yeah? In other words,
Don't you have to pay interest on that debt?
well, not if the payments, if you agree to pay somebody back 5%, you don't have index bonds. I wouldn't recommend that the government issue index bonds. Issue regular bonds. So hoodwink people into buying these Bermuda dollar bonds and then create inflation to inflate some of it away. You know, that's exactly what happened at the end of the Second World War. They used a process called financial repression. In fact, the U.S. and the U.K. forced Americans to hold U.S. government debt at very low rates, and then they created inflation. It's an old trick that governments can use. So that's one thing.
It's what would devalue our local currency.
Yes. So that's one underhanded thing I think that the government can do. But it is what it is. Hopefully we'll learn to be very careful about creating debt. And that also applies to the private sector, because the private debt is, 4 or 5 times bigger than public debt. Yeah? I mean, our public debt is around $2 billion, and the private debt is several times that.
Is that our own personal debt?
Our own personal debt, yeah. And so we need to learn that we can't finance our future off of debt. Debt is like a steroid for an economy. You don't want your young people taking steroids. You don't want your economy taking steroids. Let's get used to living within our means, or better still, live beneath our means.
That's why we can finance, convert from US dollars to Bermuda dollars, because there aren't Bermuda dollars that we have to be able to convert this. And we can't create them unless you earn them.
Slight problem, yes. Yes.
They're asking the public to do something. You know, practically we can't do that.
Well, we can.
Is it Michael?
Yep.
Good evening. Speak regular. Okay. You briefly touched on entrepreneurship as well as John Swan, Sir John Swan. I told my children this year that I said I wish somebody had said this here to me when I was at that age of 18. The scenario I gave my children, there's 2 types of people in this world, employers and employees. And between that defines the type of education that you get. An employer will get what you call a financial education, which allows your earning to be infinite. There's the entrepreneurs. Those that choose to be employees get a traditional education, which is coming to the college and stuff like that, and like you say, get a high-paying job, get a degree, specialize, whatever the case might be. Sorry about that. So my question to you is, would it be more beneficial to start instituting more financial education into the public school system, so therefore at the end of the day we know how to earn money or create money in today's society, being based that it's all about money, and no longer looking at this situation when you're low income, you still have the mental capability of generating money off that little bit of money that you're earning. So therefore you're no longer relying on that government pension or whatever it is. It's that the fact is that you can now see and invest in entrepreneurs who in turn can give you a better return on your money than sitting around and waiting for the government to hand you out a check. I think you use the scenario, take $100 from a rich person, give it to a poor person. I like to think like that's like winning the lottery. If you give $1 million to a poor person, because they have no financial education, they'll turn around and lose that money. Versus somebody that has that, if Sir John was to turn around and lose his wealth today, tomorrow he'll make it right back. But somebody like, and I'm being real, because he has what is called financial education, which is not really taught to majority of the people in today's society. So going back to my question is, do you think it would be more beneficial that we incorporate financial education in the school? And for those of you that don't understand what I'm talking about, just visiting that game Monopoly. If you used to actually teach your children that game Monopoly at a very early age, you know, buy a few houses, get a hotel, it's the same concept. You know, so just wanted to get your take on that.
You know, schools, the education system is expected to do a lot of things. A lot of it, I think, parents, you know, these are discussions that you need to have over codfish and potatoes. Schools can teach it, but if it's to be reinforced, it's got to be a part of life. And I think for most people, unfortunately, it could be taught in school, but the next week it's gone. Unless it is being reinforced in a family setting, whether it be, you know, friends, uncles, the extended family, unless you've got that, it's not really going to sink in, unless, of course, you've got like some freak. And I mean, entrepreneurs are freaks. Let's be real.
Thank you very much.
They are delusionally optimistic people, you know, and they are rare. And they can take a banging and get right back up and come again. Most of us can't do that. You know, I took a job at college for a particular reason. I'm a sissy. I don't like licks. So, you know, your particular species, if you will get it by hook or by crook. But yet, you're right. I mean, we do need more financial literacy, especially when it comes to choosing your pension. So you sign up for a job, and the company gives you a list of options. Which one do I pick? Most people, you know, they just close their eyes and pick one. So, yes, literacy, financial literacy is a plus. But unless it is underscored or reinforced within the family, within the community, I don't really see how it can gain traction.
The only reason why I mention it because you know, both of my children are actually overseas in school, and my youngest one, when he started school at 5, part of his curriculum at the age of 5 was a little bit of financial education,
yes,
as well as my child. So they actually carry that all the way through where he gets his IGCSEs and the rest of the stuff, and know that it's part of his curriculum in school. So as far as what you're saying, the reinforcement, I understand the portion that I have to play
yes.
in that at home. But stating that, being that a lot of us be involved, you know, you go to school and all the rest of it, you tend to come here and be in here where a lot of that gets passed on, and there's parents that didn't get it,
yes,
get involved and actually get to learn stuff.
And then there are some of us who are just dreamers. You know, we look at lizards and say, oh man, I got to catch that bad boy. And we spend like a whole afternoon creeping up on a lizard and catch him. And then we're looking at down his guts, you know. Some of us are like that. We're not interested in checkbooks as such. I was one of the guys that chased the lizards. Right. So, you know, no matter what they were teaching in school, I was just thinking about lizards.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. I think we have time for one more question, and we'll call it a day here.
Okay.
Or a night.
The question, you said earlier that talk to a Norwegian. I did talk to a Norwegian. And he told me his name was Thor. You can't get much Norwegian than that. But he had lived his whole life in Norway. It's an underpopulated country, and he said he was frightened of the fact that the North Sea oil would run out, and that was when the troubles would start in Norway. Scotland's going through the same thing right now. They voted to stay with the United Kingdom because the average person there started to realize that they were taking a risk, just like you said, the high risk of being on their own and the North Sea oil running out. And it would run out for Scotland a lot sooner than it would for Norway. I was wondering how you can address that. If the North Sea oil runs out, there's not much for the Norwegians to do. He told me, he said there's no rich people in Norway. And I guess that's true. I mean, it's a very expensive country, but they spend it all on bridges, linking the islands together. There's a lot of wealth spent by the government on major projects, government projects, but the individual doesn't have any money. And when that North Sea oil runs out, they're going to be in trouble.
But that was a political decision that Norwegians made.
Yes.
To tax themselves at, say, 50% so that they wouldn't have to pay for education. If they get sick, they don't have to worry about hospital bills. You know, it's a pretty good life. But you're not going to be filthy rich in Norway.
In reality, I was on a ferry boat that I did go up the coast of Norway. And the girl that was waiting the tables was an engineer. Does that make sense?
One question? Caleb?
Yes, Mr. Simmons.
Yes, sir.
I couldn't, most of the comparisons you made to Bermuda and the Nordic or Scandinavian countries, one of the biggest differences I see that in those Scandinavian countries, we have mostly, well, for the most part, socialist governments. So, is Bermuda willing to take that paradigm shift and probably, one might call it regression, from full capitalism, I don't want to say backtrack, but it would essentially be that in my mind, to move to a socialist form of government so that the pie could be shared more proportionately? And the second question, I know we're talking about the long run, but in the short run, or let's say short to medium term, can the BMA consider quantitative easing as the Federal Reserve has done in the US to, I don't want to say create virtual money, to basically buy back and have more equity in the market?
Okay. The answer to your first question is no. Bermudians, because I think of our Anglo-Saxon roots, aren't looking to sort of create a Norway. I think Bermudians at their roots are pirates. Yeah? That's what we've been since the beginning of time. You know, we want something, we go out there and we get it, by hook or by crook. And so piracy in and of itself has massive differences in income and wealth. The pirates do well. Although within the piracy community, there's a fair degree of equality. So on a pirate ship, the wealth on the ship is fairly distributed. But with the people who aren't on the ship, well, you know, they're not on the ship, they'll just get a couple of crumbs. So I don't think culturally we're ready for a Norway. Your second question about quantitative easing, it's one of those crazy ideas I would like to agree with, but there are some problems with the Bermuda Monetary Authority Act that prevents the government from creating new money. Yeah, my thought exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of a form of quantitative easing, of buying back the bad debt that banks have on their books. Of course, there's a problem with that, in that the banks are likely to sell you the crappiest assets that they have to get it off their books. But you don't want the crap of the crap, you just want the crap. Yeah, because then you've got to get the lending going again. But I mean, I understand where you're coming from, because it seems to have worked in the United States. It's not clear that it's worked in the UK, but you know, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. On Bermuda College campus, it's a great thing for us to talk about. Unfortunately, you know, when you go across to that real world, you know, where those weird people live, they don't really like us. But on campus, we're free to discuss these things. And that's what I love about Bermuda College.
Well, thank you, Mr. Simmons. We appreciate your giving us a taste of our economic pie, and we can go home and digest this, and maybe with a few grains of salt as well. But I'd like to mention that the Bermuda College Lecture Series Committee aims to feature eminent individuals in academia, business, the arts, society, and politics to enrich both campus and community. I believe we can say that Mr. Simmons has met this objective and has given us something to think about. On behalf of co-chair Dr. Sajni Talaram and the Lecture Series Committee, we wish to thank Mr. Simmons for his provocative lecture on our economic pie. And I'd like to add that the flyers that were distributed are not affiliated with the college that you may have received here during the evening. I'd like to ask Mr. Masters to come and assist me and present properly remembrance to Mr. Simmons.
On behalf of Bermuda College Lecture Series, I want to thank Mr. Simmons for his speaking tonight, and this is a token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Drive safely.